Ever walked into a room and felt like everyone knew a secret you did? That's exactly how Andrew Parker Bowles felt for most of his life. Now, at 86, he's finally breaking his silence and telling the world what really happened behind the closed doors of the British monarchy. This isn't just another celebrity breakup story. This is a tale of power, control, and a choice that changed the future of the royal family forever. What you're about to hear is the truth about a 60-year-old secret that the palace hoped would never come out. Imagine sitting in a quiet, rainy pub in the English countryside. The year is just a few years ago. Outside, the weather is gray and gloomy, but inside, an old man with a lifetime of memories is about to change history. Andrew Parker Bowles, a retired military officer, orders a simple black coffee. He's not in London, far from the cameras and the flashing lights. He's in a small town called Wiltshire, where life moves slowly. For decades, reporters from all over the world have tried to buy his story. They've offered him piles of money for the little black notebook he carries with him, but he always said no. He always kept his mouth shut. However, as you get older, you start to think differently. You start to wonder if history should know the truth. On this particular afternoon, he's looking at his phone, scrolling through pictures of his ex-wife wearing a very heavy, very expensive crown. He starts talking to an old friend from the army. And in that moment, the story that everyone thought they knew begins to fall apart. Most people think they know what happened. They remember the sad story of Prince Charles, a man who was deeply in love with a woman he couldn't have. They remember the hurt, the drama, and the messy divorce. They think Andrew was just a jealous husband who stepped aside so the prince could finally be happy. But that's not how it really happened. Andrew wasn't just any guy. He was a high-ranking soldier in a very fancy cavalry regiment. He knew all about power, rules, and how to follow orders. His family had been close to the royals for generations. His parents were best friends with the Queen Mother. He understood the secret rules of the palace long before he even met Camilla. He wasn't a victim of the royal system. He was just a piece on a very big, very old chessboard, and the game was all about protecting the throne. Back in the 1970s, London's high society was a very small world. Everyone knew everyone. Andrew met Camilla at a polo match, which is a very fancy horse game. They both loved horses, hunting, and laughing. But Andrew was also a bit of a ladies' man. He caught the eye of Princess Anne, the Queen's only daughter. They started a brief but intense romance. This was a huge problem for the palace. Princess Anne was the Queen's daughter, and Andrew was a Catholic. In those days, a Catholic couldn't marry a royal without causing a massive constitutional crisis. The Queen Mother, who was very powerful, started to worry. She needed a plan. She needed to move the pieces around the board to fix this mess. It was at this very same time that a young Prince Charles was introduced to Camilla. They hit it off instantly. But the timing was terrible. Charles was the future king, and in the 1970s, the royal family expected their future kings to marry a virgin. Camilla, in their eyes, had a past because she'd had other boyfriends. So a plan was hatched. A powerful man named Lord Mountbatten decided that Charles had to leave the country. He was sent away on a navy ship for 8 long months. The message was loud and clear: stay away from Camilla. But if Charles had to leave, then Camilla had to be taken off the market. She had to be married to someone else, and quickly. The pressure all fell on Andrew. He got a quiet visit from his own dad and Camilla's dad. These two older men had a very specific goal. They wanted a wedding, and they wanted it now. They didn't wait for Andrew to pop the question. They took matters into their own hands. The two fathers actually wrote a formal announcement about the engagement and sent it straight to the newspaper. Andrew woke up one morning in 1973 to read about his own engagement in the Times newspaper. He hadn't even proposed, but the trap was set. There was no way out. The wedding happened on July 4th, 1973. It was the biggest social event of the year. The Queen Mother was there, Princess Margaret was there, and Princess Anne, who had just broken up with Andrew, watched her friend Camilla marry her ex-boyfriend. Everyone smiled for the cameras, but the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Prince Charles, stuck on his Navy ship thousands of miles away, was so upset that he reportedly cried when he heard the news. The palace had won. The future of the monarchy was safe, and Camilla was now Mrs. Parker Bowles. For a few years, the marriage looked pretty normal from the outside. They moved into a big, fancy house in the country called Bolyide Manor. They had two kids, a boy named Tom and a girl named Laura. Andrew worked hard in the military and was really good at his job. He even organized security for big royal events. He was a trusted insider. But behind the closed doors of their beautiful house, things were cold. Andrew was often away in London, living the high life at his club. Camilla was stuck in the country with the kids. The distance between them grew bigger and bigger every single month. Then came the 1980s. Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer in a massive fairy tale wedding. Everyone watched it on TV. But the old connection between Charles and Camilla never died. By 1986, they started seeing each other again in secret. They used friends' houses and remote estates to hide their affair, and Andrew knew exactly what was happening. But he didn't storm into the palace screaming. He didn't demand an explanation from the Prince of Wales. As a military man, he chose a different strategy. He chose to stay silent. Now, his silence wasn't a sign that he was weak. It was a calculated move. Andrew was managing a very tricky situation while trying to keep his career alive. He enjoyed the status and power that came with being close to the royal family. He was invited to royal hunting parties. He even rode in the fancy horse parade at Ascot. He was living two lives, the heartbroken husband in private and the ultimate royal insider in public. The palace loved his discretion. They rewarded him with promotions and special access. But a secret this big can't stay hidden forever, especially when the media is sniffing around. The year 1992 was a total disaster for the Queen. She called it her annus horribilis, which is Latin for horrible year. The marriages of three of her kids fell apart at the same time. Then came the biggest blow of all. A secret tape was leaked to the press. It was a private, very intimate phone call between Charles and Camilla from 1989. The newspapers called them the Camillagate tapes. The transcript of their conversation was printed in every single tabloid in the world. The embarrassment for Andrew was total. He couldn't pretend anymore. His army buddies were reading about his wife's intimate conversation with the prince on the train to work. His kids were getting teased at school. The quiet agreement between Andrew, Camilla, and the palace was completely shattered. Public was furious and demanded action. The monarchy was shaking. A decision had to be made, and it had to come from the very top. In January of 1993, Andrew got a mysterious invitation to a private meeting in London. It wasn't at a palace, it was at a discreet office belonging to a royal lawyer. There were no cameras and no press releases, just a single sheet of paper sitting on the desk. The document outlined a path forward that would protect the Prince of Wales at all costs. The palace needed Charles to be single again so he could eventually marry Camilla and settle things down. But to do that, Andrew had to agree to walk away first. The lawyer made the terms very clear. If Andrew fought the divorce, they would leak all sorts of embarrassing stories about his own private life to the press. They had files on his relationships, his debts, and his club memberships. It would ruin his military career and his good name. But if he agreed to a quiet, uncontested divorce, he would be taken care of. His pension would be safe, his kids would keep their social status, and he would remain an honored friend of the royal family. He had 24 hours to make his choice. Andrew looked at the document. He knew the power of the institution he served. He signed the paper. The announcement of their separation came out in 1995. The statement was brief and called it a private matter. The public just assumed Andrew left because he was tired of the affair. They didn't know about the secret document. They didn't know he was pushed out by a system that needed his wife to save the future king. Now, decades later, this old soldier sits in that same Wiltshire pub, looking at his worn leather notebook. The secrets inside aren't just personal memories anymore. They are historical facts. He watched his ex-wife walk down the aisle of Westminster Abbey to be crowned queen. He sat in the crowd, a quiet witness to the final chapter of a plan that was 60 years in the making. He smiles faintly as he finishes his coffee. The world thinks they know why he walked away. But the true story is written in the pages of that little notebook, a story the palace hoped would never see the light of day. Let's go back in time to understand the real Andrew. Picture a heavy silver ring catching the light at the Knightsbridge barracks. It's late 1972. Andrew is adjusting his uniform in front of a mirror. As an officer in the Blues and Royals, he was surrounded by history, horses, and strict discipline. He knew how to follow orders, but he also knew how to move through the tricky social world of London high society. A captain's salary wasn't enough to buy a fancy house in Mayfair, but having the right family background opened every single door. Andrew had those keys. His grandmother was a close friend of the Queen Mother. His dad was a racehorse owner who drank gin with Prince Philip. Andrew grew up playing on the lawns of royal estates. He learned early on that to survive in this world, you had to be absolutely discreet. You never talked to reporters. You never complained about bad luck. You kept your head down and your uniform clean. But his personal life was about to crash into state security. The problem started with a red sports car parked outside the barracks. Princess Anne would drive herself to meet Andrew for lunch. They were a striking couple. Anne was tough, sharp-tongued, and totally independent. Andrew was confident and charming, completely unfazed by her royal title. They spent weekends riding horses together. For months, the London gossip columns hinted that they might get engaged. But the relationship hit a massive legal wall. Andrew was a Roman Catholic. Under a very old law, any royal who married a Catholic lost their right to the throne. Princess Anne was high up in the line of succession. The Queen Mother called a private meeting with her advisors. She looked at a family tree on her desk. The decision was immediate. The romance had to end before the press forced them to make a public statement. They had to move Andrew away from the princess. At that exact moment, Camilla Shand came back into the picture. She was living in a small flat in London and was 25 years old. She was funny and deeply in love with Andrew. They had been dating on and off for years, but Andrew refused to settle down. He liked being free. Camilla's dad, Major Bruce Shand, watched his daughter's unhappiness and got angry. He decided to act. He called Andrew's dad to arrange a secret meeting at a gentleman's club. The two older men drank scotch and looked at the calendar. Prince Charles was scheduled to leave on a long Navy trip in January 1973. The trip was a deliberate plan by the palace to keep Charles away from Camilla. The fathers realized they had a small window of opportunity. If they didn't marry Camilla to Andrew right now, Charles might come back and create a huge crisis. The fathers shook hands on a plan. They completely bypassed Andrew. One Tuesday morning, Major Shand walked into the offices of the Times newspaper and handed a clerk a handwritten note. It announced that an engagement had been agreed between Captain Andrew Parker Bowles and Miss Camilla Shand. It was in the paper the very next morning. Andrew was sitting in the dining hall at his barracks when a fellow officer shoved the newspaper under his nose. He had never proposed. He had never bought a ring. Andrew called Camilla, and she was just as surprised as he was. But the public machinery was already moving. Congratulations flooded in. His commanding officer told him the regiment expected a big military wedding. To back out now would cause a massive public scandal, ruin his career, and alienate his entire family. Andrew realized he had been completely outmaneuvered by his own dad and his future father-in-law. The big question is why a proud military officer accepted this forced arrangement so quietly. The answer was in a private file held by his regiment. Andrew had huge debts from polo horses and his London club lifestyle. Major Shand offered a lot of money to clear those debts immediately. In exchange, Andrew had to marry Camilla before Prince Charles returned from his Navy trip. The contract was financial, social, and military. The wedding was at the Guards Chapel in London. Thousands of people lined the streets. The Queen Mother arrived in a black limo, smiling. Princess Anne walked in alone, wearing a high-collared dress. She sat near the front, watching the man she loved marry her close friend. Prince Charles was on a ship near Gibraltar. He wrote a letter to a friend that night calling the news a cruel blow. The palace had won. The new couple moved into Boley-eyed Manor. On paper, they were a perfect country family. But the marriage was an agreement, not a romance. They lived separate lives under the same roof. By 1979, things changed again. Prince Charles, now 30, was under pressure to find a wife. He visited Boley-eyed Manor a lot to hunt and play polo with Andrew. The three of them often sat around the dinner table together. The local villagers saw Charles, Red Aston Martin parked in the driveway on weekends. They just thought he was visiting his old polo buddy. They had no idea what happened after dinner. Andrew played the role of the perfect host. He never challenged the prince. He understood that his social position, promotions, and his entire future depended on him cooperating with the heir to the throne. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel. He got prestigious assignments. The palace rewarded his silence with concrete status. But a new factor was about to ruin this delicate balance, Princess Diana. In 1981, Charles married Diana. The world watched a fairy tale. Camilla sat in the crowd wearing a gray suit. Andrew stood nearby in full uniform. The young Princess of Wales quickly realized her marriage included three people. Tension inside the family started to boil. Diana refused to stay quiet like the old aristocracy. She started to fight back. Soon, the public learned about the secret arrangement. By the late 80s, the palace was a battleground of leaked stories and midnight phone calls. Andrew found himself stuck between a furious princess and a desperate prince. His quiet country life was about to become global news. Let's picture a polo match at Windsor Great Park. It's July 1985. Andrew hits a ball, turning his horse sharply. Prince Charles is sitting in the royal area, talking quietly to Camilla. Princess Diana is sitting a few rows away, hiding behind dark sunglasses. The public sees a sunny, fun afternoon. But the people in the front rows see something else. Andrew rides past the royal box, tips his cap, and keeps going. Charles and Camilla had officially started their relationship again. They used a network of country houses. One main location was a beautiful stone house called Middlewick House, which Andrew and Camilla bought in 1985. It was less than a 15-minute drive from the prince's own country house. The tension inside the Parker Bowles house grew with the proximity. Visitors noticed that Andrew's presence was rare on weekends when the prince's car showed up. Staff got clear instructions about which bedrooms to prepare. Andrew spent these days at his London flat. He didn't cause a scene because he was a pragmatist. He knew his military career was tied to his silence. In late 1986, Andrew was promoted to colonel. He was also given the role of silver stick in waiting to the Queen. This meant he was in charge of royal protection during big state events. He now held keys to the palace offices. The ultimate mystery is how an officer could manage royal security while his boss was having an affair with his wife. The answer was in a hidden deal made at a club on Piccadilly. Andrew met with a senior palace secretary over lunch. The palace needed to make sure Andrew wouldn't file a scandalous divorce that would legally destroy the prince's chances of becoming king. The secretary offered a deal. Andrew's promotions would be fast-tracked, and he would get a guaranteed seat on several money-making business boards when he retired. In return, the marriage had to stay legally intact. Andrew accepted. He continued to appear with Camilla at public events, smiling for the cameras. He even went on hunting trips with Charles. The British establishment saw him as the ultimate gentleman who put the crown before his own pride. But the facade started to crack when Princess Diana started her own media campaign. Diana knew all about the secret visits. She refused to accept the old rules. She started leaking information to journalists about her husband's country weekends. By 1989, things reached a breaking point. A private security firm intercepted a very private phone call between Charles and Camilla. The recording was 23 minutes long. The contents were incredibly intimate. It didn't just expose an affair, it exposed the total vulnerability of the royal communications. The tape wasn't broadcast right away. A media executive kept a copy in a safe for months. Rumors of its existence spread through the military. Andrew heard about it from a fellow officer. He knew his quiet arrangement was no longer safe. A single leak could destroy his reputation instantly. He confronted Camilla at Middlewick. The argument was short. Andrew didn't focus on the cheating. He focused on the exposure. He told her the palace couldn't protect them anymore if the tape came out. He packed a suitcase and drove back to London. He moved out for good. The separate lives they had lived for years were now official. The palace scrambled to control the damage. They knew that if Andrew sued for divorce based on adultery with the heir to the throne, the damage would be permanent. Andrew got another visit from a high-ranking royal lawyer. The old deal wasn't enough anymore. The palace needed Andrew to sign a strict contract that said he would never write a book, give interviews, or testify in any future legal case. In return, they would guarantee his kid's financial future and double his military pension. Andrew signed it in December 1990. But the news cycle moved faster. Less than 2 years later, the tape was sold to a foreign newspaper, and the world heard every word. One morning in January 1993, the newspapers hit the desks. The headline was huge. The full transcript of the phone call was printed on 4 pages. Andrew walked past, saw the black text, and kept walking. He locked himself in his office. His phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days. The tape was now public property. The timing was catastrophic. The pressure on Andrew became unbearable. He got a call from his boss at noon. The regiment was worried about its image. He couldn't hide anymore. The tabloids parked 20 photographers outside his apartment. They followed his staff to the grocery store. The secret arrangement was dead. Andrew left London under the cover of darkness, driving to his brother's house. He left his phone behind. He needed to speak to Camilla privately. He used a payphone at a petrol station to call her. When she answered, her voice was shaking. She was trapped in her house, surrounded by media. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Andrew didn't offer comfort. He told her the marriage couldn't survive this. He was calling his lawyers. Camilla agreed, but the palace machine was already working on a counter-strategy. Answer came through a courier with a sealed pouch. Inside was a legal brief. The palace didn't want Andrew to file for divorce based on adultery. That would prevent Charles from remarrying in the church. The brief proposed a different route. Andrew would file based on the fact they had lived apart for 2 years. This didn't require mentioning any fault or infidelity. It looked like a normal breakdown. The document included a financial schedule. Andrew studied the figures. He knew the money wasn't a gift. It was payment for his compliance. If he refused, he'd pay massive legal fees and risk losing his military pension. The walls were closing in. He picked up his pen and wrote one word, agreed. The legal machinery moved slowly for 2 years. Andrew stayed out of sight, focusing on his duties. On January 11, 1995, exactly 2 years after the tape leaked, the formal announcement was made. The statement was less than 50 words, saying they were divorcing amicably. The press moved on. Andrew felt relief. He was a single man, financially secure. He had followed the rules and saved the crown. But the final chapter was yet to come. 10 years after the divorce, in 2005, Prince Charles was given permission to marry Camilla in a civil ceremony. Andrew got an invitation. He was asked to sit in a prominent row alongside his kids. The palace needed him there to show there was no bad blood. The old soldier had to play his part one more time. Years later, the gold-embossed invitations for the coronation arrived at Andrew's home. The date was May 6, 2023. He adjusted his medals as he walked through the great stone archway of Westminster Abbey. He was 83 years old. He passed rows of prime ministers and dignitaries. The usher guided him to a prominent seat, just a few rows behind the immediate line of succession. The day was broadcast to millions. King Charles III was crowned alongside Queen Camilla. They saw Camilla's children and grandchildren taking central roles. Andrew sat quietly. He watched his ex-wife walk down the aisle in white and gold robes. The tension in that corner of the abbey was visible to those who knew the history. When the crown was placed on Camilla's head, she made brief eye contact with the guest section. Andrew didn't look away. He nodded slightly. It was a silent acknowledgement between two people who shared a 40-year secret. The public saw a happy family gathering, but the palace archives knew the real story. The big mystery for decades was why Andrew never broke his silence. Other royal associates wrote books and sold stories. Andrew stayed completely quiet. The reason became clear at a small gathering with some retired cavalry officers. He explained that his silence was never out of fear. It was the final condition of a lifelong military contract. In the late 90s, the palace ensured he got a fancy, well-paying job as a director of a racecourse group. More importantly, they agreed that his children would always be treated as royal family members. His son Tom became a godfather to Prince George. His daughter Laura's kids were chosen as pages for the coronation. Andrew realized early on that an angry ex-husband would ruin his children's future. By cooperating, he secured their titles, their wealth, and their social safety. He traded his personal pride for his family's permanent security. The palace got what it needed. They presented Camilla as a respectable woman who was free to marry the king, without the shadow of a bitter first husband contesting the story. Andrew looked at the news reports on his TV back in Wiltshire. The newspapers called Camilla the savior of the modern monarchy. They praised her loyalty and dedication. Andrew smiled as he closed his leather notebook. He knew the true cost of that crown. He knew about the legal threats, the secret lunches, and the forced engagement notice in 1973. He had played his part perfectly, from the guard room to the abbey pews. He walked out to his garden as the sun went down. He had survived the scandals, the leaked tapes, and the collapse of his public reputation. He was 86 years old now, and the crown was safe. The royal family had moved on, and the secrets were locked away in the palace vaults. Andrew Parker Bowles had finally completed his long service to the British monarchy. He walked back inside his house, locked the front door, and turned off the lights. Andrew Parker Bowles gave up his voice so his family could keep their place in history. Now, after 60 years of silence, his story is finally being told.